Deep in Appalachia, there's a forest the locals don't hike through. They survive. They say it takes people without warning. Hunters who know every trail, children who only wandered a few steps too far, strangers who felt called by the trees. Some are never seen again. Others stumble out days later with hollow eyes and stories that don't make sense. But here's the part that haunts the mountains most. For every life the forest takes, another seems to be given back. Women who couldn't conceive return pregnant. Men on the brink of death walk out healed. Lost souls emerge changed, carrying memories that aren't theirs. No scientist has explained it. No map can mark it. This is the Appalachian story of a forest that doesn't just kill, it chooses. The old-timers in Cutter's Gap said the forest up on Whisper Ridge had a memory longer than any living soul. They said it remembered every drop of blood spilled on its floor, every prayer whispered beneath its canopy, every child born in its shadow, and every elder it had taken back into the earth. My grandmother, Essie Blackburn, told me the forest was neither good nor evil. It simply was, the way a river is, or winter. But like a river or winter, you had to respect it, or it would take you down. I didn't believe her until the autumn my brother Daniel disappeared. It was 1967, and I was 16 years old. Daniel was 19, fresh back from a year at the State College over in Boone, full of new ideas and restless energy. He'd come home talking about ecology and conservation, words that sounded foreign in our holler, where folks still heated with wood and hunted to fill their freezers. Daddy said college had put foolish notions in his head. Mama just worried, the way she always did. "That forest ain't a classroom, Danny," she told him one morning as he packed his rucksack with notebooks and pencils. "You can't study it like it's something in a book." "That's exactly why I need to go, Mama," he said, flashing that crooked grin of his. "To see it as it really is." He kissed her cheek and headed up the mountain path, same as he'd done a dozen times that summer. Only this time, he didn't come back. We searched for 3 days. Every able-bodied person in Cutter's Gap climbed that mountain. Farmers and miners, the preacher and the postmaster, even old Silas Mabry, who hadn't set foot on Whisper Ridge since his logging days 40 years before. The sheriff brought dogs from the next county. They picked up Daniel's scent easy enough, followed it deep into the old growth where the trees grew so thick the sun barely touched the ground. But then, the trail just ended, like Daniel had sprouted wings and flown away, or like the earth itself had opened up and swallowed him whole. On the 4th day, my grandmother asked me to walk with her. Essie Blackburn was 82 years old, bent as a hickory bow from decades of field work. But her mind was sharp as the skinning knife she kept in her apron. She'd been born in a cabin on Whisper Ridge, delivered by a Cherokee midwife when her mother's time came early during a spring planting. Folks said she knew the forest like she knew her own heartbeat. We climbed slow, stopping often so she could catch her breath. She didn't head toward where the search parties had been tramping around, churning the undergrowth to mud. Instead, she led me to the eastern slope, where a spring bubbled up from between 2 ancient oaks. "This here's the beginning place," she said, settling herself on a moss-covered stone, where the forest first started taking and giving, long before there was a Cutter's Gap or a Blackburn family or even a state called North Carolina. "Granny, We should be looking for Daniel. Hush now and listen. I'm fixing to tell you something important. She pulled a tobacco pouch from her pocket and began rolling a cigarette with gnarled fingers. The Cherokee who used to live here, they understood about this forest. They knew it was alive in ways that go deeper than roots and sap. They knew it had rules. I waited while she lit her cigarette with a match struck against the stone. When I was a girl, no older than 7 or 8, my cousin Jeremiah went missing up here. They searched just like they done for Danny, and they found nothing, just like now. My grandmother, your great-great-grandmother Molly, she told me then what I'm telling you now. The forest takes one sometimes, when it's hungry, when the balance tips wrong, but it gives back too, if you know how to ask. That's just superstition, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Is it? She fixed me with those gray eyes that seemed to see through skin and bone. Your brother came up here trying to study the forest like it was a dead thing under glass. But you can't study a living thing without being part of it, without understanding that it might study you right back. The wind picked up, sending dry leaves skittering across the ground. In the distance, a crow called out 3 times. What happened to Jeremiah? I asked. He came back, she said. 3 weeks later, stumbled out of the woods like he'd been gone 3 hours. Couldn't remember nothing about where he'd been, but he was changed, gentle-like. He could doctor animals, could find water anywhere, could tell you 3 days ahead when a storm was coming. The forest gave him back, but it gave him back different. It had taught him. She stood up, grinding her cigarette out under her boot heel. Come on, I'll show you how to ask. We walked deeper into the forest, following paths I couldn't see. Granny moved with surprising confidence, touching certain trees as we passed, murmuring words I couldn't quite hear. The afternoon light slanted golden through the leaves, and I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. How the saplings grew in spiral patterns around their elders, how the mushrooms clustered on the north side of fallen logs, how the whole forest seemed to breathe in rhythm with itself. We came to a clearing I'd never seen before, though I'd hunted these woods since I was old enough to carry a rifle. In the center stood a massive chestnut tree, one of the few that had survived the blight that killed most of them decades ago. Its trunk was wide as a small room, its branches reaching up like prayers into the darkening sky. The heart tree, Granny said. This is where you make your asking. What do I do? You offer something of yourself, not money or food. The forest don't need those things. You offer a truth, something real and raw, and you ask for Daniel back. But you got to mean it, got to be willing to accept whatever form that takes. My throat tightened. What if it doesn't work? Then it doesn't work, and we bury the grief and move forward like humans have always done. She touched my shoulder, her hand light as a bird. But your brother ain't dead, child. I'd feel it if he was. He's just lost between the taking and the giving. You got to help him find his way back. She left me there, alone in the clearing with the heart tree and the gathering dusk. I stood for a long time, feeling foolish, feeling desperate. The rational part of my mind, the part that got straight A's in science class, the part that wanted to go to college like Daniel, said this was nonsense, that I should be out with the search parties, checking caves and ravines. But another part, older and deeper, remembered all the stories, all the things that couldn't quite be explained away. I placed my palms against the rough bark of the chestnut tree. "I'm scared," I said, and my voice cracked. "I'm scared all the time. Scared I'm not as smart as Daniel. Scared I'll never get out of this holler. Scared I'll end up like Daddy, working myself to death in the mines. Scared that Mama's sadness will swallow her whole. Scared that I don't know who I am or what I'm supposed to be." The words poured out. Of me, truths I'd never spoken aloud, barely admitted to myself. I cried, pressing my forehead against the tree, feeling the bark rough against my skin. "Please," I whispered, "please give him back. He's good. He's trying to understand. He just wants to learn. Please don't take him. Take me if you need to take someone, but let him come home." The forest went silent. No birds, no wind, no rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth. It was like the whole mountain was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a sound like singing, though there were no words, just a melody that seemed to come from the earth itself, from the roots and the rock and the ancient water flowing beneath. I felt the tree warm under my hands, felt something vast and patient turn its attention toward me like a great eye-opening. And I understood, in a way that had nothing to do with words or thoughts, that the forest had indeed taken Daniel, but not out of hunger or malice. It had taken him because he'd come seeking, and the forest only reveals itself to those who seek truly. He was being taught, like Jeremiah had been taught, and the lesson wasn't finished yet. But my asking had been heard. I don't know how long I stood there. Time felt different, elastic. When I finally opened my eyes, full dark had fallen, and the moon was rising fat and orange above the trees. I should have been terrified, alone in the forest at night, but I felt calm, held, safe in a way I'd never experienced before. I found my way back to Granny's house by instinct, following paths that seemed to light themselves under my feet. She was waiting on the porch, rocking in a chair. "You asked?" I asked. "Good girl. Now we wait." Daniel came back on the 7th day. A hunter found him asleep in a bed of ferns, not half a mile from where his trail had ended, curled up peaceful as a child. He was thinner, sunburned, his clothes torn, and his feet bare. But he was whole, alive. They brought him down the mountain, on a stretcher, Mama crying, and Daddy grim-faced with relief. The doctor checked him over and found nothing wrong except dehydration and exhaustion. No injuries, no signs of exposure or struggle. It was impossible, the doctor said. Nobody could survive a week in the wilderness without food or proper shelter, certainly not in such good condition. But Daniel had. He slept for 2 days straight. When he finally woke, he couldn't tell us where he'd been or what had happened. His memories of that week were like a dream that fades upon waking, full of impressions and feelings, but empty of facts. He remembered walking and watching and learning, but he couldn't say what he'd learned or who had taught him. It was like he struggled to find words, sitting at Mama's kitchen table with a cup of coffee warming his hands. Like I was part of everything, like I could feel the trees growing and the water running under the ground and the seasons turning. Like I was made of the same stuff as the mountain. Daddy frowned, worried the college had broken something in his son's mind. But I saw the way Daniel's eyes had changed, deepened, like they held green shadows now. And I noticed how he knew, without being told, that Mama's headache was from worry and not sickness. How he could tell the weather 3 days ahead. How the old dog that had been sick for weeks suddenly improved after Daniel spent an afternoon sitting with it in the yard. The forest had given him back different, just like Granny said. He didn't go back to college that fall. Instead, he stayed in Cutter's Gap and started teaching folks about the mountain. Not from books, but from knowing. He showed them which plants could heal and which could harm, where the water ran purest, how to read the land so they could work with it instead of against it. Old-timers who'd lived there all their lives found themselves learning things they'd never noticed, seeing the forest through new eyes. And slowly, quietly, things started changing in our holler. Folks took better care of the woods. The hunting became more mindful, the timbering more selective. It wasn't about conservation or ecology anymore, those college words Daniel had come home with. It was about respect, about understanding that you were part of something larger than yourself, something that would outlast you and remember you after you were gone. As for me, I went to college the next year, but I came back every summer and for good after graduation. I became a teacher in the one-room schoolhouse where my grandmother had learned to read, and I taught the children not just from books, but from the mountain itself. We'd take walks up on Whisper Ridge, and I'd tell them the stories, help them listen to what the forest had to say. Granny Essie died the winter I turned 23, passed peacefully in her sleep with snow falling soft outside her window. We buried her in the cemetery on the ridge, under the old oak where her own mother lay. At the funeral, I noticed how the trees seemed to bend toward her grave, how the crows gathered but didn't call out, how the wind moved gentle through the branches like a song of welcome. The forest had taken her back, I thought, but that wasn't quite right. She'd never left the forest at all. None of us had. We were all part of it, part of the taking and the giving, the living and the dying, the old growth and the new. The forest didn't take life and give life as separate things. They were the same thing, the same endless cycle of transformation and return. Years passed. I married a good man from the next holler over, had 3 children who grew up running wild on Whisper Ridge. Daniel never married, but he wasn't lonely. He built himself a cabin up near the heart tree and lived there year-round, becoming something between a hermit and a prophet. Someone people came to when they needed wisdom or healing, or just someone to help them understand the strange, beautiful mystery of being alive in these ancient mountains. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'd climb up to visit him. We'd sit on his porch and watch the fireflies rise from the forest floor like sparks from an invisible fire, and he'd tell me things he'd learned. The forest isn't separate from us, he said once. That's what I didn't understand before. I came up here trying to observe it, to study it like a scientist. But you can't observe something you're part of. You can only participate. You can only belong. Is that what happened to you that week? He smiled. That same crooked smile, but wiser now. I think I stopped being just Daniel Blackburn for a while. I became something else, something bigger. Or maybe I became what I always was, underneath all the ideas and fear and wanting. Just part of it all. Were you scared? At first? Then I wasn't. It was like coming home, except home was everywhere and everything. The forest showed me how to die without stopping, how to live without beginning, how it's all just one long transformation, And the only thing that really matters is how much love and attention you bring to each moment of it. I thought about Granny Essie, about Cousin Jeremiah, about all the people over all the years who'd climbed Whisper Ridge and come back changed, or didn't come back at all. About my own children growing up in the shadow of these mountains, learning to listen to what the rocks and trees had to teach. The forest takes life and gives life, I said. No, Daniel corrected gently. The forest is life. Taking and giving, that's just us trying to understand something too big for words. It just is. And so are we. And that's the whole mystery and the whole answer right there. The fireflies rose higher, drifting up toward the stars, and somewhere in the darkness a whippoorwill called out its lonesome song. The forest breathed around us, ancient and patient, and I felt my own breath sink with it, felt my heartbeat match the pulse of sap in the trees, felt myself expand to include the night and the mountain and the sleeping earth. Daniel was right. The forest wasn't something separate, wasn't something to be feared or conquered or even understood. It was simply what we were, what we'd always been, what we'd return to when our time came. And in that moment, sitting on my brother's porch with the mountain alive around us, I felt no fear of that returning, only gratitude for the mystery, for the transformation, for the endless cycle of taking and giving that made us all. Every person, every tree, every creature that walked or flew or crawled, part of the same vast, breathing, impossible whole. The old-timers were right. The forest had a memory longer than any living soul. But they were also wrong, because we were the forest's memory. We were how it remembered itself. And when we told our stories, when we passed down the wisdom from Granny Essie and her grandmother and all the grandmothers before, stretching back to the Cherokee and beyond, to peoples whose names were forgotten but whose knowledge lived on in every tree and stone, we were the forest telling itself its own story, taking life and giving life, teaching and learning, dying and being born. All the same thing in the end, all just the forest, breathing. My youngest daughter, named Essie after her great-great-grandmother, asked me once why I always took them up to Whisper Ridge, even when it was cold or rainy or inconvenient. Because that's where we come from, I told her. And it's where we're going, and it's where we are right now, even when we're down in the valley doing dishes or homework or chores. The forest is always with us, child. We just have to remember to listen. What does it say, Mama? I thought about that for a long moment, thought about Daniel in his cabin and Granny Essie in her grave, and all the unnamed souls who'd walked these mountains since before there were words to name them. It says you belong, I told her finally. It says you're home. It says you're part of something so much bigger and older and wiser than yourself. And that's not scary. That's the most beautiful thing in the world. It says die when it's time to die, and live while it's time to live, and trust the transformation. It says the taking and the giving are the same thing. It says pay attention. It says be grateful. It says remember. She nodded, solemn as a preacher, and took my hand. Together, we climbed up into the forest that took life and gave life, that took us and gave us, that was neither cruel nor kind, but simply, endlessly, miraculously itself. And we listened, and the forest spoke, and we were home.